There is a machine in Veldhoven, Netherlands that costs about $400 million, and exactly one company on Earth knows how to build it. Every advanced chip running the AI boom right now traces back to that single company. But ASML's own technology is hitting a wall that has nothing to do with export controls, a wall built out of pure physics. And a Chinese research university thinks it has found a way around both problems using a machine that isn't a laser at all. Nobody has ever managed to build a second version of that machine. And the reason comes down to one process nobody outside the industry sees. Every advanced chip on the planet right now, the processor in your phone, the chips running the current AI boom, gets its smallest features printed using extreme ultraviolet lithography, EUV for short. Inside ASML's scanner, tin droplets smaller than the width of a human hair get fired at a rate of around 300,000 times a second, hit twice by separate lasers, and vaporized into a plasma hot enough to emit light at a wavelength of 13.5 nanometers. That light bounces through a system of curved mirrors, reflects off a patterned mask, and prints a chip circuitry onto a silicon wafer, one of these scanners running at roughly 135 to 145 wafers an hour when everything's working right. Chuanxiang Tong, an engineering physics professor at Tsinghua University, has pointed out that this reflective system loses about 30% of its light at each of 11 separate mirror bounces before it ever reaches the wafer, mirror after mirror after mirror. 11 bounces, 30% gone each time, just to deliver a fraction of the original light to the chip. That is the machine the whole modern chip industry depends on, without exception. EUV only entered mass production back in 2018, after roughly 2 decades of development that nearly bankrupted the effort more than once, and it's currently priced somewhere around $400 million per unit. ASML shipped 48 of them in 2025 alone, worth 11.6 billion euros, on its way to a market valuation north of $550 billion, and its newest high-NA systems, built to push resolution even further, now sell for 2 to 3 times that per unit. It is also the machine China has been locked out of since the Dutch government stopped renewing its export license back in 1919, a restriction that falls under the Wassenaar Arrangement, the international agreement that bars EUV lithography equipment from reaching Chinese customers. No EUV scanner has ever legally shipped to a Chinese fab. Not one, ever. That lockout didn't happen in a vacuum, and understanding the timeline matters because it explains why China isn't simply waiting this out. The Dutch government first sat on the export license under direct pressure from Washington, and by 2024, the restrictions had widened well beyond just EUV, adding metrology tools, software, and a longer list of Chinese fab locations to the blocked column. Every round of tightening was aimed at the same target, buying the US and its allies a multi-year head start on the most advanced processors, the exact kind of chips that now train the world's biggest AI models. For a while, that strategy worked exactly as designed. China had no legal route to EUV, and everyone assumed that meant China had no route to competitive chips at all. Here is where it gets interesting, because ASML's own scanner has a ceiling that money and engineering cannot simply bypass. At 13.5 nanometers, EUV photons carry so much energy that there just aren't very many of them landing on any given exposure, and physics has a name for what happens next: shot noise. Photons arrive at the wafer somewhat randomly, the way raindrops hit a sidewalk unevenly instead of falling in a perfect grid. At larger features, that randomness barely registers. At the smallest features on today's leading chips, it starts to matter enormously because a single missing or misplaced photon can leave a bridge between 2 lines that should never touch, or a gap in a line that should never break. Think of it like trying to fill in a coloring book page using a spray can instead of a marker. From a few feet back, the color looks even. Zoom in close enough, and you start seeing gaps where paint simply never landed, and blobs where too much landed in one spot. EUV photons behave the same way once the shapes being printed get small enough. Industry researchers now track something called the stochastics resolution gap, and at the 2 nanometer node. It currently sits at around 5 nanometers, meaning chip makers can print a shape reliably in a lab test that they still can't reproduce at scale across a working fab. Even with EUV running at full power, the cut and via layers on a 3 nanometer chip still need multiple exposure passes just to survive this randomness. The exact multi-patterning workaround EUV was supposed to make obsolete in the first place. ASML is answering this with brute force, pushing source power from around 250 watts towards 600 and eventually 1,000 watts, spending upward of $300 million per unit on the next generation scanner alone. But raising the power creates its own problem. The thin pellicle membranes protecting the mask now need to survive far more energy without burning through. So the industry is racing to develop carbon nanotube pellicles just to keep pace with the source. It's still trying to make brighter. Chip labs are also chasing new metal oxide photoresists formulated with tin and hafnium compounds, specifically because they absorb 5 to 10 times more of each incoming photon than older organic resists, squeezing more usable signal out of the same noisy light instead of simply waiting for a cleaner source to eventually arrive. The industry solved EUV's original problem, the wavelength, decades ago. What it has not solved is the noise hiding inside the light itself, and no amount of Dutch engineering makes a photon arrive somewhere. It statistically refuses to land. That physics wall is exactly why China's next move isn't optional, and this is the part the export control story usually skips. China has had zero legal path to a new EUV scanner since 2019. So its workaround has been running the wafer through an older deep ultraviolet tool, 3, 4, sometimes more times to approximate what a single EUV pass would do, a technique called multi-patterning. SMIC bought roughly 90 of ASML's most advanced DUV immersion machines in 2024, before any restriction ever covered them, worth an estimated $5 to $7 billion, and used multi-patterning on that fleet to hit a 7 nanometer process, the so-called N+2 node. That's the process behind the chip inside the Huawei Mate 60 Pro, the phone that shocked Washington when it launched in August 2023, because teardown analysts hadn't expected SMIC to clear 7 nanometers on DUV tools alone for years. And yet there it was, running a domestic Kirin chip in a phone sitting on retail shelves. SMIC is now pushing that same multi-patterning approach toward 5 nanometers, with yields reportedly sitting around 20%, well below the roughly 80% TSMC gets at equivalent nodes using EUV directly. And in April 2026, a bipartisan bill called the Match Act started moving through Congress, specifically to close that exact DUV loophole, targeting the exact tools SMIC is currently leaning on, and naming SMIC Huawei and memory makers, CXMT and YMTC directly. The bill even gives allies in the Netherlands and Japan a 150-day window to tighten their own rules before Washington moves alone, which tells you how seriously this loophole is being taken at the highest levels of policy, not just inside chip industry trade press. ASML has already told investors its China revenue is sliding from 33% of total sales in 2025 down to about 20% this year as the controls tighten around it. Multi-patterning buys China time and buys it real chips today, but it does not buy China a real path past 7 or 5 nanometers, because every extra pass adds cost, adds defects, and adds days no scaled foundry can absorb forever. And the timing here isn't a coincidence either. This entire race is unfolding while AI accelerator demand is exploding on both sides of the Pacific. Huawei's own Ascend chips depend on exactly this DUV multi-patterning pipeline to reach the volumes its customers are asking for. And every extra pass those wafers need is a pass American and Taiwanese competitors simply don't have to run. That's the quiet cost of the export controls working as designed. They didn't stop China from making chips. They made every chip China makes more expensive, slower to produce, and capped at a ceiling multi-patterning eventually can't push past no matter how many extra passes get added. If China wants a real path to smaller nodes without asking anyone's permission, it needs an entirely different kind of light source, one nobody has to grant an export license for because nobody else is trying to build it this way. If you're finding the physics side of this useful, this is the kind of mechanism breakdown I do every week on this channel, so it's worth hitting subscribe now, because what Tsinghua's team is actually building looks nothing like a scanner at all. The project is called Steady-State Microbunching, SSMB for short, and the design starts from a completely different question than ASML ever asked. Instead of vaporizing tin one droplet at a time and throwing the plasma away after every flash, picture a circular tunnel somewhere between 100 and 150 meters around, roughly the footprint of 2 basketball courts laid side by side. Inside that ring, electrons circulate continuously at nearly the speed of light, lap after lap, never stopping and never getting discarded. A secondary laser reaches into the ring and organizes those circulating electrons into extremely tight clusters called microbunches, precisely spaced so that when each bunch curves through the ring's bending magnets, the radiation it throws off reinforces itself instead of scattering randomly, the way ordinary synchrotron light does. A normal synchrotron, the kind physics labs have used for decades, produces a smear of light spread across many wavelengths at once because its electrons simply aren't organized this tightly. Microbunching is what turns that unfocused smear into a narrow, genuinely useful beam, concentrated almost entirely at 13.5 nanometers, the exact wavelength a lithography scanner actually needs. The electrons keep circulating, keep getting reorganized into fresh bunches lap after lap, and the ring keeps radiating EUV light the entire time it's running, continuously, not in flashes. That's the detail almost every viral write-up of this project gets wrong, and it's worth being precise about it, because the words matter here. This is not a free electron laser firing, short, high-intensity pulses, the way some coverage described it. A free electron laser and a storage ring are 2 different machines built for 2 different jobs. SSMB is closer to a continuous wave EUV faucet, radiating steadily instead of flashing in bursts the way a pulsed laser does, which is exactly the kind of steady, high average power output that could sidestep the shot noise problem baked into ASML's pulsed tin plasma from the ground up. More average photons hitting the wafer over time means less randomness per exposure, which is the entire physics argument for building this thing at all. Tsinghua's own design target is EUV power, above 1 kilowatt inside a bandwidth of around 1 to 2%, centered on 13.5 nanometers, several times the power a single ASML source produces today. Though power on paper and power delivered reliably to a wafer are 2 very different engineering problems. The narrow bandwidth matters just as much as the raw power. A narrower band of wavelengths means fewer stray photons scattered outside the useful 13.5 nanometer range, which in theory means fewer of the mirrors along the way need to correct for wasted light, which is a big part of why Tang's team believes this design could eventually need fewer than ASML's current 11 reflective bounces to deliver usable power to a wafer. This isn't some overnight concept either, and the credibility chain behind it matters, because a viral claim built on real physics still needs real history to back it up. 2 Stanford physicists, Daniel Ratner and Alexander Chow, first proposed the underlying microbunching theory back in 2010, more than a decade before it ever went viral in China. Tsinghua formed a dedicated task force to chase it in 2017, working alongside Germany's Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin and the Physikalische Technische Bundesanstalt, two of the same research institutions Western physicists trust for precision measurement, not exactly a secretive domestic-only effort built in isolation. In 2021, that collaboration published a paper in the journal Nature proving the microbunching mechanism actually works, tested at a real synchrotron in Berlin called the metrology light source. That paper is worth being precise about, because precision is the whole point of this channel. It proved the underlying physics holds up under experiment, that electrons really can be trapped and organized into stable microbunches lap after lap inside a storage ring. It did not print a chip, and it did not prove a full EUV power version of the ring exists yet. Those are two very different milestones that a lot of the viral coverage collapsed into one, treating a physics proof from a European research lab like a chip already rolling off a Chinese production line. The research didn't stop at that single 2021 paper either, which is worth knowing before anyone dismisses this as old news. A follow-up study published in Communications Physics in 2024 ran systematic tests on the same Berlin proof of principle setup and confirmed the microbunching process behaves exactly the way the original theory predicted, holding up under more rigorous, repeated scrutiny rather than falling apart, the way plenty of promising accelerator concepts eventually do. That's the kind of unglamorous, incremental confirmation that never goes viral, and it's exactly the evidence that separates a real physics program from a headline. It doesn't erase the skepticism, though. Researchers at Belgium's IMEC, the research hub every major chipmaker consults on advanced lithography, have pointed out that a working prototype light source is one milestone, but the yield gap, the ability to print millions of defect-free chips at commercial scale, remains a formidable barrier. No accelerator paper alone gets you past. Real progress and genuine, unresolved limits sitting right next to each other in the very same set of citations. Now here's what actually separates China's approach from everyone else racing toward the same finish line, because China is not alone in trying to replace ASML's light source. And the comparison is where the real story lives. 3 different countries making 3 very different bets on the same underlying accelerator physics. In Palo Alto, a startup called X-Light is building its own accelerator-driven light source, but its design philosophy is the opposite of Tsinghua's. Instead of one giant centralized ring, X-Light built a compact, roughly 25-meter linear accelerator specifically so it can retrofit onto ASML scanners already sitting inside existing fabs, feeding EUV light to as many as 20 machines from a single source producing around 5 kilowatts. The company has raised $40 million in its latest funding round, and it's led by Nicholas Kelez, previously the chief engineer on Stanford's LINAC coherent light source. Intel's former chief executive officer, Pat Gelsinger, joined as executive chairman back in March 2025. X-Light's own prototype is targeted for 2028, printing wafers in a standalone building next to the fab it's feeding. Over in Japan, KEK is chasing a third path entirely, an energy recovery LINAC that reclaims the spent electron beam's leftover energy instead of dumping it as waste heat, the accelerator equivalent of regenerative braking in an electric car, recycling energy that would otherwise just become heat in a beam dump. Targeting more than 10 kilowatts of continuous EUV power, more than 40 times what today's tin plasma sources put out, through sheer efficiency rather than raw scale. 3 countries, 3 completely different bets built on the same underlying accelerator physics. America is trying to bolt a new light source onto the fabs that already exist, minimizing disruption to what's already built and already paid for. Japan is trying to make the accelerator itself radically more efficient, minimizing wasted energy per photon produced. China is the only one of the three not designing around ASML's factory model at all. It's designing a facility where the accelerator sits at the center, and several lithography tools draw light from that one ring simultaneously. An entirely different bet than shrinking the source to fit inside somebody else's machine. Put the three side by side and you can see three different relationships to the incumbent. X-Light wants to sell its light source into ASML's existing installed base. KEK wants to out-engineer ASML's efficiency numbers on a similar architecture. Tsinghua is aiming past ASML's factory model entirely, betting on replacing it outright, either the most ambitious bet on the table or the least realistic one, depending entirely on whether that ring near Xiong'an ever hits its power target. And that brings us to the correction. This video actually exists to make because getting excited about real physics is not the same thing as getting the timeline right. Back when this project first went viral inside China in 2023, it got nicknamed the lithographic cannon, with some coverage claiming a working version was right around the corner and would let China leapfrog ASML within a couple of years. Independent science writers pushed back on that framing almost immediately, pointing out that the underlying idea had been public since 2010, that the 2021 Nature result was a physics proof and not an engineering product, and that realistic timelines put full practical deployment somewhere in the range of 15 to 20 years out. That correction still holds today, and it lines up with what ASML's own CEO said in 2024, putting China's broader lithography capability somewhere between 10 and 15 years behind the leading edge. Two very different sources, an outside science writer correcting a viral post, and the CEO of the company being challenged, landing on roughly the same window. A working accelerator ring is not, by itself, a working lithography machine, no matter how much power it eventually radiates. You still need mirrors precise enough to handle that light without degrading, pellicles that survive kilowatt-level power without burning up, photoresist sensitive enough to react cleanly to the wavelength, and masks manufactured to atomic tolerances. An entire supply chain, China does not yet control any more completely than it controls EUV scanners today. It's the same ecosystem gap that's kept SMEE, China's own scanner maker, years away from shipping a domestic EUV tool of its own, even as its early domestic DUV machines only now reach a handful of fabs, with roughly 5 units expected in 2026 and about 20 more the year after, nowhere close to the volume ASML already ships. The physics being real does not mean the factory is close, and anyone telling you China is a year or two from printing 2-nanometer chips off this ring is selling you the same overstatement that got debunked back in 2023. So here's the actual shape of the story, and it isn't China is behind, or China is about to leapfrog everyone either. It's that a country locked out of buying the world's most important machine is trying to make that machine's entire category optional, by building a fundamentally different kind of light source that nobody else has to approve an export license for. ASML spent 2 decades and untold billions perfecting a machine that fires tin droplets 300,000 times a second, engineering around noise instead of eliminating it. Tsinghua is betting that the smarter move isn't building a better version of that machine. It's making the entire premise of a single, exportable, licensable scanner irrelevant. Whether the ring near Xiong'an ever hits full EUV power at true industrial scale is still an entirely open question. And the honest answer is, nobody outside that lab knows yet. The safest, most accurate read is the one nobody ever clips into a headline. This is a real physics program, backed by real institutions, chasing a real gap in ASML's own roadmap, running on a timeline measured in decades rather than months. That's a very different story from a secret weapon about to end a monopoly overnight. And it's also a far more dangerous story to casually underestimate than the version that gets mocked and dismissed. But while this accelerator is still years from printing a single working chip, China has already shipped one using a workaround everyone insisted couldn't scale past 7 nanometers. And that breakdown, the actual chip, the actual yield numbers, the actual machine ASML said was impossible, is on screen right now.